All right, guys, fuck it. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to give you guys a secret behind the business model that the fastest growing direct to consumer businesses are using in this space. This is a subscription based business model. I'm talking about the model that Rise, Everyday Dose, Groons, and pretty much all the fastest growing brands that have got to tens of millions of dollars a month in sales have been using to scale that quickly. Now, of course, people use other business models, so this is not the only model that works, but this is by far the predominant model that if you want to get from zero to $10 million a month and beyond that as quickly as possible, this is the model that allows it to happen. If you're trying to find information on this model, by the way, just do a search yourself on YouTube. You will find absolutely nothing and no one breaking it down. This is probably the most gate-kept information in e-commerce right now. And it is the model that the people that are scaling the hardest and the most aggressively are relying on because it just makes scaling so much easier. The reason why is because it creates predictability in your business. And that predictability allows you to know that you have a certain amount of revenue coming in every single month, which if you do this model right, grows month over month. And when you have those numbers that are coming in, what you can use is those numbers to offset the losses that you need to incur to keep that snowball growing every single month. And I'm going to break this all down. I'm going to share my screen where I have a spreadsheet. I'm going to break down the actual numbers for you guys so you guys can understand how this all works. So just give me a moment. But what I want you guys to understand is that this is the model that will allow you to scale so much further than almost any other model right now because of those reasons I just mentioned. And the reason why I feel like I'm qualified to even speak about this is in the last 30 days alone, we've processed over 1.7 million in subscription-based revenue. And if we keep doing our model right, that model should keep growing month over month. And I'm going to show you how we can use that to our advantage to allow us to create this infinite money loop. And as long as you have the right numbers in place and you're optimizing the right things, you will keep being able to grow this loop. So with all that being said, I'm going to jump into my screen and show you guys how this works.
All right, guys, we're back in the screen. I apologize that you guys now have to go from seeing my face in full, how you just saw it before, all the way down to this condensed version with much less pixels. It must be tough to transition from that. So I apologize, guys. You'll have to make do with the smaller screen of my face. With that being said, I want to go into how this model actually works. So again, we're going to be going over the subscription and infinite money loop, and I'm going to be breaking it down from how we've applied it in our own business and how these big guys are also using it. So just to show that I know a little bit about what I'm talking about, if we go into my recharge dashboard over here, which I pulled a screenshot from, you guys can see that in the last 30 days, we've processed over $1.7 million in subscription-based revenue. And we're looking to grow this every single month going forward. So this is really where that snowball effect takes place. This is where that money loop starts to take place. And I'm going to break it all down for you guys so you guys understand in theory and strategically how this all works. So first thing I want to do is map out the strategy, like I said. And then next, I have a spreadsheet prepared for you guys so that you guys can actually start to plot in these numbers and see how this actually works in practice tactically so that you guys can start to apply these numbers for your business. So hopefully you guys can be able to scale a lot further before even optimizing other stuff. That's what's really cool about this, because what this allows you to see is how much room you have to spend on CAC, how big you can make your CAC, how gigantic you can make your CAC. And don't look at that in a dirty way, guys. We're just talking about being able to spend more on that customer acquisition, extend it out as much as possible. So what I want to break down for you guys is first how this looks strategically. So on this side, we got MRR, that stands for monthly recurring revenue, which is ultimately what you're doing with a subscription-based business model, right? So every time you acquire new customers, a certain percentage of those, if you're running a subscription-based business, will go out to become a subscriber. And when they become a subscriber, they go into this pool of monthly recurring revenue. And the more new customers you acquire that become subscribers, the bigger that this grows, the bigger that this snowball becomes. So this ball just keeps on becoming bigger and bigger. So the more new customers that you go out and acquire. So on the other side, we have NC, which will stand for new customers, right? Which is what I just said. So that's how this whole thing works, is that you got the new customers. Every time you acquire new customers, a percentage of those become subscribers, and this keeps on growing. Now, the thing is, there's always going to be a little leak over here. So let's just make this like, this is a leak. It's supposed to be water coming out. I apologize again for my shitty artwork, but hopefully you guys start to understand what I'm trying to say. Pretty much over here, what happens is you're always going to have a certain percentage of customers that churn. So this ball becomes smaller, but as long as you're bringing in enough new customers every single month, then this will continue to get bigger and bigger. But if you stop bringing in the new customers, then the ball can actually start to become smaller and you're going to actually see your monthly recurring revenue shrink. So the strategy here is that you always have to be acquiring new customers so that you can always keep this snowball growing. Now, here's where the model gets really interesting, right? Because once this snowball becomes so big, and we're talking about, let's just say this snowball becomes $1 million a month, right? So you're making $1 million a month that you know is already coming in. Then what can happen is, based on the levels of churn you have, you can start to only acquire, let's say, 300K worth of new customers. So the new customers you bring in the beginning will have to be much bigger, but as this snowball starts to grow, the new customers can be smaller, and this will be able to compensate for this. Now, the thing we're going to try to do is, in the beginning, when you're trying to grow this snowball, you might have to be hyper profitable on this new customer acquisition, right? So let's say your break even is a 1.5. You might want to scale this at a 2 ROAS, right? Where you're making some profit on these new customers so you can start to bring people in. Now, the bigger this becomes, the more that you can use it to offset losses on the front end, which means that on this 300K new customer acquisition, you actually might be able to scale this now at a 1 ROAS rather than a 2 ROAS, because you already have all this, which you don't have to pay for additional ad spend because it's monthly recurring revenue that's coming in to offset the losses that you're going to have over here. So obviously I'm talking about this very theoretically. So let's actually jump into now a spreadsheet to actually walk through how this would look in practice. Okay, guys, so what I'm going to do is break down, let's say we were projecting out our numbers out for November, and I'm going to run you guys through this model and how this whole thing would work. So let's say we wanted to be super aggressive. Let's just say we wanted to go out and acquire 30,000 new customers. Now, let's say that our front end AOV is $50, and let's say that our target to start, we'll just keep it as a 1 ROAS, and that blended new customer ROAS that we're talking about. So this is between all of your channels like Facebook, Google, everything outside of like Amazon. This would be including that. So just blending everything together at a 1 ROAS, meaning that you can spend $50 to acquire that $50 customer. Now, if you do this model right, which is not even what the point of this video is, but let's say that you can also do 20% of whatever revenue you do on Facebook and that blended ecosystem back on Amazon. And then let's say that the total cost that you're paying to Amazon, between the ad spend, between the fees that you're paying to Amazon, between your COGS on this side as well, ends up being 50%, meaning that you're netting another 50% on what you're doing from Amazon. And then let's say that if you have a good business model, you would hope that your cost of goods plus fulfillment can be around a 5 to 1. So let's just use it like this. Some of you guys might be higher, some of you guys might be lower, but let's just use 20% as the base. Now, remember what I said before is when we go back into this sheet over here, when you have these new customers that are coming in, you want it to be that as high of a percentage of those people will end up becoming subscribers so that they can grow this MRR, because a gap can come right here where if this is, say, 50% of new customers enter the MRR and the monthly recurring revenue, then that won't be so good because you're not going to be growing this flywheel as much as possible. Whereas let's say you get it up to 95% like we have here, and that's how Rise has it, that's how Runes has it. Of course, there's a lot of stuff which would have to be a completely separate video, and this is really what I work very closely with our private clients on, is creating a offer that allows them to actually be able to sustain 95% without destroying your conversion rate. That's a big piece. But let's say you could get to there and you could get 95%. I want to show you how this model will come together. In terms of your subscription price, right? If you're selling it for $50, let's just assume that you have $50 that you have on a recurring basis, because that's the price over here. Of course, this number can also be optimized, and this is a big thing that I work with my clients directly, is to actually optimize subscription average order value. And let's say that the subscription fulfillment cost ends up being something similar to that ratio. So we'll call it $10 to that $50, right? Now, this won't go all the way out to 12 months. This will just be, we'll look at this from 7 months. But going back to how the model works is that there's always going to be a certain percentage of people that churn, right? So let's just say that you could get your numbers to 70% of people on month 1 renewing, then 50%, then 40%, then 25%, then 15%, and so on and so forth, right? So this is just essentially 30 days later, how many people are going to renew this subscription? 70%. Then next it will be 50%. So this number will always go down typically. Now, the rate at which it goes down can vary, of course. Now, this would be pretty decent for first 3 months, but then pretty steep churn just in how this example is laid out right now. But based on this, let's look at what these numbers would actually look like in practice. So what you can see over here is that the revenue that you would make is 1.8 million, right? And the way that we got to this number is that we're taking the number of new customers you're going and acquiring based on that front end AOV to then show you how much you're making on day 0. So this is before any of that subscription revenue actually kicks in. This is how much money you'd be making, which would be 1.8 million. Then this is showing you what your total cost on everything would be. So this is showing 1.65 million. This is factoring in your cost of goods, which we have listed out in this formula over here. This is showing your Amazon fees, other costs like that. And then this is going to show you, this is less relevant in month 1. This will also have a place to put your OpEx, which is your operating expenses. Let's say it's 20,000. Let's just say, honestly, it's a little bit higher than that if you're scaling to this rate. So let's say it's 50,000. And then this will show you what your net profit is at these numbers, which is 5.39. So this is just showing you the effect of what would happen, right? And again, this is scaling at a 1 return on ad spend. This is ridiculous, right? We're talking about literally scaling at a 1. And based on that, just by having a good Amazon boost, that can get you to being profitable on day 1 at a 1. So what this would mean is, let's even be a little bit more pessimistic, honestly. I want to look at this where we can be a little bit more aggressive. Let's say it's 30% COGS. I realized we had a bit of an error in the formula. So what I did is I moved it to 30% over here. And as you can see, actually now we're negative, which is probably closer to how most of this model would work. So in order to sustain this level of growth, you would have to be able to sustain negative $350,000 in losses on day 1. But to show you what starts to happen based on these effects that you're getting from the monthly recurring revenue streams is that by day 30, you would be making an additional $997,000. And the way that this number is coming into fruition is because 70%, so first off, out of these new customers, you're getting 95% of those people to renew. On that 95%, you're then getting 70% of those people to renew at this rate with this amount of cost. So based on your cost and based on how many people are renewing, you're now making $798,000 in profit that next month. And when we look at the cumulative look on that, which is the 1.8 million, which we made in month 1, plus this new revenue, which we're making on day 30, with all of the costs now factored in, this is 2.3 million now becomes $500,000 in net profit, which is 17.8% margin just 30 days later. And if we look at it just based on these numbers with the same type of formula, just now going to the next month and the next month, we're actually now at 37% net on day 90 as a result of this, right? Based on these different cohorts and how this whole thing looks. Based on this, we could actually probably scale this thing a lot further just based on the way that these numbers look. And by scaling it further, it can mean either going more customers if that rate can sustain, or what we could actually do is afford to go at a lower new customer ROAS, even like a 0.8 in this example, meaning that on a $50 front end AOV, we could spend $63. And still by day 90, we're going to be netting 30% margins almost. And I think a healthy place to be is typically 20% by day 90. A lot of people in the biggest and fastest growing brands are okay with breaking even on day 90, and that's how they can scale super aggressively. But let's just say we get this to 20%. What would that mean? It would mean that on this exact model right now, we could scale to 0.7, right? Now, here's the caveat, right? In order to be able to do that, we would have to be able to sustain negative $992,000 in losses on day 0. And by day 30, still be down negative $144,000, meaning that we would have to be able to sustain $1.137 million in order to be able to get to the point where we actually start to be in the positive of 881,000 by day 90 as a result of this. So the way that this becomes an infinite money loop is by using the revenue plus MRR base that you already have. So the way that this actually looks is, in order for us to be able to sustain this type of model in the first month, is as long as we are theoretically having the same exact numbers that we're seeing over here, so 857, right? If this was the number that we knew we had coming in from a monthly recurring view base, this would offset these losses that we have in this next month. And then the next month, we would have new MRR that hopefully could offset that additional loss that we would see coming in. But really what it has to be is just whatever we see on day zero, we have to make sure that we have enough revenue to offset that so that we could actually be able to scale and actually see the fruits of that by day 90. If you don't have that base though, then you're going to fall into major cash flow deficits and issues to be able to sustain it. So if you don't want to do it like this, then you have to have a lot of bootstrap money to be able to just go off the rip and start becoming this aggressive. But if you want to do this bootstrap, and the way that you turn this into an infinite money loop is that you only go negative to what you can sustain from the revenue plus MRR base. And ideally, you don't do it to that same extent because of course things can go wrong. Of course, you might have an influx of churn that you didn't predict for. So you want to give yourself at least 10 to 20% room, meaning that I would want to make sure I would have at least, let's just call it 1.1 million that I know is coming in over here. So that even if my churn, that's not 1.1 million, let's just call it, if I want to be super aggressive, that I have predicted coming in. And this is also factoring in because what will happen is if you use Recharge, Loop, any of those big subscription platforms, usually they won't calculate the churn that would be predicted. So when you look at your revenue and the upcoming revenue that it's projecting out for you, you want to make sure that you're looking at it with the average churn cycles that you have and maybe even going a little bit more aggressive so that whatever it's telling you your numbers will be, factor it in by, let's just say 20 to 30% less, depending on wherever your churn numbers fall. And then based on that, you want this number to then equate to what this is. Now, excuse me, because I'm forgetting one other crucial point, is that this is going to be your net losses. So it can't be your net revenue. It would have to be actually your net profit on that number. And if you're holding 20% of your cost being over here, then whatever it is, you just have to factor out those costs so that you know that your profit can sustain what your losses are. So obviously I'm showing you guys a pretty aggressive example here, but the key things that you want to know over here and the way that we like to operate it is that by day 90, we want to be at least 20% margins. And on day zero, as long as we have these numbers to sustain it, then we can go even more negative on that front end ROAS. Now, of course, if you can sustain higher front end ROAS, then it doesn't mean you have to go negative. But what this means is that you now have the flexibility to be able to afford more on acquiring customers depending on where your monthly recurring revenue stream is at. Now, guys, what I'm showing you over here is really just the tip of the iceberg. And with our clients, what we do is we run a similar model to this. But what we do is we extend this out to first 6 months and then all the way to 12 months. So that what we can do is based on these predictions and based on how these numbers actually start to go out, we can start to look at how monthly recurring revenue will compound month over month so that we can start to project out how that will look in the future based on what the current data points actually look like so that we can actually start to do longer term projections and start to plan how much inventory we need, plan the credit lines and what we need to sustain if we want to go a little bit more above this and be a little bit more risky because we know what the compounding effect looks like. So again, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully what I'm articulating here is how this model actually works so that you guys understand that the way that this all works now in essence is that you have to be able to plot out all these different numbers so that you know where all this money will be coming from. And then this will also show you what your biggest bottlenecks are so that you can start to optimize it. Because let's say that this is looking at these numbers right now, where currently this would be at 37%, let's say, but let's say this number was actually only 80% of people coming in. You can see that this actually starts to drop a ton. And also let's go back to the 0.7 just so we're looking at the numbers the same as before, because again, this was at like, I think it was 21%. But as you can see, if this is only 80% of people opting in or 50% of people opting in, right? These numbers don't work anymore because now this is at a 0.57 if we only have 50% of new customers opting in. So if that's the case, then you have to figure out how you're going to optimize that without completely destroying your conversion rate, which is obviously a huge thing. And this is a big thing that we help our clients do. Now, if this is in a good place, right, like what we were talking about before, which is 95%, then what if this number is actually only $30? Your AOV is that, again, the model doesn't work. The question will be, how do you actually improve your subscription average order value? How do you improve that? Because that has a major compounding effect that happens on the back end, right? So what if we got that to instead $70 instead of that $50? Now you can see how ridiculous this gets now. We're at 35% margins, which means theoretically to get back to that 20%, we could go all the way down to a 0.5 on new customer acquisition. Imagine whatever you're scaling at. Imagine if you could scale your meta ads at a 0.5, but realistically a little bit lower even, because this is blended also factoring in other channels, and hopefully you're using Google and maybe some other channels as well. So imagine what you could do if you could scale these numbers. You could probably double your business off the rip. So the thing is, if you can actually understand these numbers and understand the relationship of these numbers to what you can do on a scaling front, this is really how you start to optimize everything. And the thing is, realistically, I'm showing you guys pretty decent numbers over here, but most of your numbers are probably much worse than this, especially on your retention numbers, especially on the subscription AOV, and especially on this. So this is exactly what we help clients optimize. We help them create the right framework to maximize the amount of new customers that enter the subscription program. We then help them optimize their subscription average order value so that we can get the most out of that compounding effect. And then we show them all the stuff that they can do in the back end to optimize all of these retention numbers to ultimately make these numbers as good and as profitable as possible so that we can grow this base MRR as much as possible so that every single month when that grows, we can start to afford to spend more and more on that customer acquisition. And again, going back to what we've done here, this is the exact model that we've been using to be able to grow at pretty much an infinite loop. Because again, as long as you have that revenue coming in, which you can predict, because once you start to have it, you have the right calculations through Recharge, which will do all that calculation for you. All you have to do is just factor in what that additional churn will be, and then you know how much money you have coming in. You get that net profit. Once you know that net profit, that's the number that you can spend to be as aggressive as possible in acquiring new customers. Now, if you want to start being more profitable, then just be a little bit less aggressive, and now you know you're going to have more profits coming in that month. If you want to be more profitable, the reason why you want to do that is so that this can grow further and further, and the more that this grows, the more that you just have those numbers there. And the business models like, again, Rise, Groons, Everyday Dose, these businesses, they're doing most of their money from MRR. Like their MRR is probably 70% of the revenue that they're doing at this point. So they're already doing tens of millions of dollars a month just in MRR because they did the work on acquiring those new customers. They had the process in place to sustain that. And now this just allows them to fund their growth and to do it. And as aggressively as they did it, a lot of those brands actually took on money and took on capital to grow as quickly as they wanted to. But if you want to do it bootstrap, you just have to do it a little bit slower. You just have to be a little bit more patient. Or you could take on some other high leverage things that we've done and other debt solutions, which again, this is what we help our clients put in place, is the actual leverage points that you can use if you want to go a little bit above and scale a little bit quicker and you see the path and you see the numbers are there and you just need the cash to allow you to do it. That's something that we help our clients put in place as well. So all this to say, guys, this is the business model that the fastest growing direct-to-consumer brands are actively using right now to scale. This is the model that we're using right now that has allowed us to process over $1.7 million in the last 30 days alone. And that should grow every single month as long as we keep on doing this model I just showed you guys. What I want you guys to take out of this is that you can start to calculate your numbers. This sheet, we have a much more in-depth version of this that we give to our clients that goes into much more, but you guys can pretty much take the exact thing. I'm not going to share this just for being fair with the clients that we have in terms of a shareable link, but what you guys can do, guys, is pretty much the same exact thing I just showed you. I'm showing you guys the exact blueprint. You can make your own model. You can start to see how this looks on longer horizons. Or if you're already at above $100,000 a month and you want to get this sheet and a much more in-depth version of this sheet, plus my one-on-one guidance to building this model out in your business in the most proper way to optimize all the different metrics to get you scaling as aggressively as possible. We're going to be taking on another 5 spots in the next week or so. So start applying now, and I'll be taking on calls where we probably will close out on these next 5 spots pretty quickly. So again, if you guys want to join, check the link down below. And I hope to see some of you guys on the other side and working with us in our amazing group. Thank you guys for watching, and let me know what you guys want to see next.